Okay, here we are for another 5 sheet today. This one with an article from CNN.com. Remember, the 5 sheet is a free open source tool that lets us cut through all the fakery we see in these news articles. Because this day and age, we cannot trust the news to give us the news. We have to do a little bit of investigative work on our own as readers to get the truthful information and to avoid being deceived. For example, on this article, we go down to the deception tactics. We got a big long list. So let's jump right in. The title, as they write it, Rand Paul's ridiculous answer on whether the election was stolen. So is that a fact or opinion? I said that was an opinion. And the word ridiculous is clearly a bit of editorialization there. That's not a provable fact, that's just a statement of opinion. And how did I paraphrase that? Rand Paul's answer on the election being stolen was ridiculous. Alright, what's the bias? CNN, Chris Cillizza, that is establishment left. They're not right wing, they're not, deeply progressive. They're like corporatist Democrat type. Alright, what's the thesis? Let's go find the thesis. It's not right at the beginning. It's down. It's this one right here. So is it any wonder that so many Republicans, contra objective evidence, believe that the election wasn't entirely above board? Of course not. Now, is that a fact or opinion? Again, that's clearly an opinion. And how did I paraphrase that? It is not surprising that many Republicans believe the election was not above board without any facts on their side. So, what evidence do they have supporting this? Without citation, the writer of this article says that there is no objective evidence, and many courts have rejected this. The rejections of many lawsuits. That's the evidence he brings to bear. Alright, let's run through the outline. Starts out with this quote from the interview Rand Paul did with George Stephanopoulos. Little background to that, and then the quote itself. And then he has this little segment. Rand Paul is factually wrong. Fact, fact. The facts are against him. Blah, blah. And then a second Rand Paul quote right there. Then he has this whole segment about how the news media should not be a neutral arbiter. Like, Rand Paul is right about journalism. For far too long it worked like this. Person A said something, person B disputed it, and the moderator said, a lot of heated views, stay tuned, which candidly did a disservice to viewers. So he's making the point there that news media is not a neutral arbiter. They need to be, partisan advocates for whatever viewpoint, whatever political side they agree with. And then last two paragraphs here about how Rand Paul and Republicans are not serious and are just rotten. Just straight up rotten. Alright, that's the outline. Now let's look at the named deception tactics. These, again, are the ones that I've identified as the most common you see in these news articles. You can look at the glossary that'll be attached in the description if you want to see exactly what these are, or you can look at some of the other videos to see examples. So the first one here, straw man feigning ignorance. Straw man, most people know what that is, but I tie that in with feigning ignorance, where you omit a material fact, because the two go hand in hand. Sometimes it's hard to disentangle one from the other. In this case, in this article, it happened a number of times. For example, most of the lawsuits he talked about, Here, let's jump to this. So he has Rand Paul say, this is the original Rand Paul quote. What I would suggest is if we want greater confidence in our elections, and 75% of Republicans agree with me, is that we do need to look at election integrity and we need to see if we can restore confidence in the elections. And this is the guy's response. It is a fact, capital, based on the total lack of objective evidence and the rejection of lawsuit after lawsuit, that there is no widespread election fraud. So he's saying that is just a straight up fact. And he doesn't give a degree of certainty, nothing we know 100%. I'm pretty sure that I'm a human being, but even that's like a 99.999%. I might be like some kind of weird alien having a dream or something. But, so when he says fact, he's implying it's like 100% here. And the evidence he gives for that is that it is no objective evidence, a total lack of objective evidence. So he's saying absolutely zero evidence, and a rejection of lawsuit after lawsuit. So let's look at the stuff he's ignoring there, the arguments and the material facts he's ignoring. First of all, the vast majority of those lawsuits did not consider the evidence. They were rejected on procedural grounds, standing, etc. So here they're being presented as if them being dismissed is proof that there was no evidence. But again, most of those cases never even looked at the evidence. So that's very misleading. That's feigning ignorance. By omitting the fact that they did not consider the evidence, it implies that they did, and it changes the entire tenor of that argument. And then total lack of objective evidence about election fraud. So certainly some instances of election fraud happened. There were actual convictions this cycle. There was at least one person got convicted of election fraud, which is an insanely high bar, showing the intent and stuff. And there were other instances where we saw votes getting switched back after things went viral on social media. So certainly there was some stuff, but what constitutes widespread is a matter of opinion. So the way he frames that is very misleading. But this is maybe the worst part of it, is that most of the Republican complaints have to do with an inability to effectively search for fraud. There was no meaningful signature matching. They were asking for certain kinds of audits, which were never done. They were asking for poll watchers to be present when those poll watchers were kicked out and then a bunch of votes were counted, you can't go back and see if those votes were counted validly or not. You're not going to know one way or another after only one side was present to witness those votes being counted. So we do have a lot of evidence that the process was all messed up. And that's where most of the complaints are. So a lot of straw man feigning ignorance in that. Alright, next one up, joke fraud. Joke fraud is where you see this a lot on, Daily Show or Colbert or something, where you substitute some kind of humor for argumentation. You have like an aw snap type moment. It's like, boom, oh, he's a slay queen or whatever. And that implies to the reader that you're winning the argument if you're able to get a laugh of some kind. So there were moments here where you're being snarky and taking the place of actual arguments. where, Rand Paul does a quote, "Well, Senator, no. Here's why. It is a fact based on, uh, whatever. There were one or two other little instances where he's being very unprofessional and just trying to get a booyah from his readers in place of actually making a point using logic, using evidence, or using argumentation. So that's joke fraud. And then there's poison the well, where you don't argue the case on its merit. You say, this evil murderer is claiming he has some kind of alibi. So by the time you hear about the guy's alibi, you're already distrustful of it because it's just what some evil murderer is claiming. And that happened a lot in this article, where he's presenting the conclusion before he presents the facts. Here's why. It is a fact based on blah, blah, blah. I think probably the most egregious example was in this first paragraph, where he ties what Rand Paul is saying into the Capitol riots on on the day the electoral votes were counted, January 6th, because that is one has a very powerful emotional resonance to people. People think if Rand Paul is like one of those Capitol rioter type guys, he's just some wacko nut job. All of his arguments are going to be wrong. But two, in today's climate, that's very dangerous. There are a lot of people today talking about those rioters as insurrectionists, as domestic terrorists, and people proposing a new, what do you call it? What was the commission? A new 9/11 commission, which was responsible for creating the Patriot Act. So, what he's saying here is not far from laying the groundwork for sending someone like Rand Paul to Guantanamo Bay, because he would be inciting people like the Capitol riot type people. And so he's just one of these domestic terrorist types. So you don't get any due process or none of that stuff. Just ship him off. So that was a very dangerous way to frame the whole article. And it comes in the very first sentence. So that frames the whole article. It's that you have in the back of your mind that Rand Paul's this domestic terrorist. Alright, so we're on to the final section here. Big picture notes. What was going on. So it was clearly an opinion piece. So it was labeled as analysis by CNN. And CNN does have opinion articles. You look at their website, they have stuff that's clearly labeled opinion. And they chose to not do that with this article. They chose to put this in a different category. They're saying this is not an opinion article. And when they say it's analysis, that's kind of them copping to the fact that it's not straight news. It's kind of opinion-y, but it's still very misleading. Why don't they just say it's opinion? How is this not an opinion piece? It's just them muddying the waters some more. It's the same way you can't tell who's a news anchor and who's an opinion guy on CNN. It's them blurring those lines. Yeah, so this statement was not Paul pushing hard on the election fraud narrative. This is him just saying, listen, a lot of Republicans don't have faith in the system. We need to start moving for some measures to get tighter, more secure elections. Something that, for example, that Chris Krebs guy agrees with. Remember the guy that Trump fired, who was the head of election security, that said this was the most secure election in American history? And then in interviews, he said, like, yes, this is the most secure election ever. Trump is terrible. But, like, yeah, I mean, we don't have a way to meaningfully audit the election results, and that's probably something we should work on. We could get better if we could actually check the receipts. But, no big whoop. So he does agree that there's ways we can improve the election integrity. And it's the same thing. By international standards, we're failing in a lot of ways. So all Rand Paul is saying here, he's not even pushing too hard that the election was stolen. He's just saying let's shore up these systems. But that's not enough for CNN. They still want their pound of blood. They're going hard on him for asking for those improvements. And a final note, I just thought it was interesting that this CNN piece had this long section on how it is not proper for a journalist to be objective, how objective journalism is wrong, how the way you need to do journalism is to be a partisan advocate, how objective journalism did a disservice to viewers and readers. Because facts do not equal opinions. And if we say it's a fact, then it's a fact. So, another grossly misleading, almost counterfactual point that they made there. Alright, guys, that's what I got for this one. If you see anything I missed, feel free to drop a comment below or run your own 5-sheet on this one. You'll see the links at the bottom. Thanks. I'll see you next time.